Hello there, just a moment, we've got our press preview, our look at what's in the morning's newspapers. First, let's tell you about our top stories tonight. And the Foreign Office says that Britons who hold dual nationality with one of the 7 countries affected by Donald Trump's travel ban will now be exempt. We'll be discussing that very shortly. Also, those protests which are taking place still outside the White House and in several cities across America against the Trump policy, which affects refugees and travellers from 7 mainly Muslim countries. This is a flavour of the demonstrations that we're talking about. This is O'Hare Airport, Chicago, people gathering there in one of the, we think, arrivals halls. Lawyers turning up there to offer their services free of charge to some of those people who may find themselves in limbo as a consequence of Friday's executive order. And the reaction on this side of the Atlantic, well, one manifestation of it is a steadily upwards ticking e-petition demanding that the state visit the invitation, of course, extended by Theresa May in Washington last week and pretty eagerly accepted. Date to be confirmed. That figure approaching 900,000 people are keen that it doesn't go ahead, given what's been happening. You're watching our press preview on Sky News. Joining us again this evening, the documentary maker and journalist Jenny Kleeman and the historian Peter Frankopan. Welcome both again. And we're going to start with the front of the Daily Mail, I think, Jenny.
Yes, the Daily Mail's chosen to go with the fact that Britons are going to escape this travel ban. And I love the fact that you've got here, the subtitle here, May steps in after global uproar. As if the global uproar were about the fact that Britons were going to be part of this travel ban. The global uproar is about the fact that this travel ban singles out Muslims and is incredibly unfair to people who have been granted asylum. And if anything, May hasn't really stepped in at all. I think the overriding image of this weekend, the image that was on the front pages on Saturday morning, was her holding hands with Donald Trump. And she didn't do anything to step in other than to tell Amber Rudd and Boris Johnson that they needed to have a chat with their US counterparts, which they did. The latest clarification this evening being that it's not going to affect Britons. But I think British people have been outraged about this, not because we care about British nationals only, but because we recognise this as a very unfair and brutal policy. And I would hate to think that people abroad thought that we only cared about this because we were only looking after our own.
Peter.
Well, I wonder whether the celebrations in France, Germany, every other country in the world, China, for their citizens with dual nationality is going to be equally pronounced. I mean, the whole thing has been a fiasco, I think, from start to finish. The executive order was badly drafted. It doesn't appear to have been cleared through Department of Justice or the Department of Homeland Security. And in fact, even this evening, while we've been on air, the Secretary of Homeland Security, he says that he deems it the entry of lawful permanent residents to be in the national interest. Now, if you're lawful permanent residents, then you have the protection of law. So why you need a clarification that that's in the national interest, and why national interest has anything to do with your status if you've been granted by a previous decree to be deemed permanent. It's a mess. So there's a bit of firefighting going on in the States. But I mean, I think that it's important to recognise that there's an audience for this worldwide. It's not just us here in Britain and in the United States, heavily divided, but in other parts of the world, particularly the Muslim world, but also in places like Russia, India, China, Africa and so on, I think there is a sense that America is the leader of the free world, and its openness, its policies towards immigrants and so on has been the making of the United States. Because after all, America is a migrant, immigrant population over the course of many, many centuries. And I think that this damage that's been done to the reputation of the US as being a closed society and being willing to take the chance of blocking, I said last night, one of the banners on one of the news outlets in the States, 134 million people banned from entering the United States.
Do you think he even cares if it works? I mean, I say that in the sense that, if your policy is America first, there was that lovely, I mean, you may disagree with it, but that characterisation of the election campaign, which was that we, the media, took him literally but not seriously, and those who voted for him took him seriously but not literally. Might this be an instance where actually we're taking him a little bit too literally? He doesn't really mean what he says.
I think a lot of what he does is symbolic, and this wall, the wall with Mexico is nothing if not a giant symbol, because people will always try and break into America, particularly from Latin America. There are, routes that people are prepared to die to take, and a lot of what he's done in his first week in office has been massively symbolic, and I think think he's into gestures, into being seen to be, the big hard businessman who is getting things done, trying to make America great again. When it comes to the actual details of what is required to make things happen, that's another question.
Well, he doesn't understand history. I mean, the Great Wall of China didn't work.
Yeah.
And nor did the Berlin Wall. These kind of structures are extremely antagonistic, they're provocative, and they are self-defeating. And there is
in every case?
Well, there are not many walls that span over many hundreds of miles. But yeah, I think when you put up the barbed wire or concrete walls, or as in the case of the Great Wall of China, the aim is to try to block out threats and challenges. And the very fact that you have to behave that way and take those defensive decisions is not in itself necessarily a very progressive one. And decisions that are made as defensive, knee-jerk efforts to look like you're doing something tend to have consequences. And I think that one of the problems that politicians have all over the world today is that if you don't join the dots beforehand, when you invade Iraq, for example, in 2003, if you don't think about what the consequences are of starting to dislodge Assad and then saying you're prepared to keep him in place, then badly thought through ideas don't just make you look bad, they have much worse consequences. And tonight, seeing a divided America with thousands, tens of thousands, if not more, at American airports, and nearly 1 million people in this country alone signing a petition of protest, shows that level of antagonism that's been stirred up by Trump, and that's extremely regrettable, because unity and stability are the things that any democracy should want.
And a feature of this story is that very often it's, you can talk about something affecting hundreds of thousands of people, it doesn't conjure up an image in the way that a single face, a single name does, like Mo Farah.
Like Mo Farah, who is a knight of the realm, who is an absolute hero, who most British people are very happy to claim as one of their own because of the fantastic medals and victories that he's won in our name. He made a very eloquent statement on Facebook, beautifully put.
If outdated.
If outdated, yes. The Queen made me a knight, Trump made me an alien, and even though the subsequent clarification that Boris Johnson has got that no, actually it's fine because he's British, we will let him in.
But that doesn't just make it right.
No.
Because you say, well, we actually will let him in anyway. The fact was he was made an alien. The fact that a government has to recoil and to readdress and clarify what it meant, that damage already gets done. I mean, Mo Farah is an absolute hero. He has not just a good closing straight, he's got a great turn of speech, and he, like Gary Lineker, who became the voice politically engaged last year, it's wonderful to see that this lead is being taken by responsible sportsmen who don't have to comment on these kinds of things. This hurts their endorsement deals, there's no benefit to him. And, I think, as Jenny says, actually being a knight of the realm, these kind of figures do need to speak out, and he's done it very eloquently.
I pulled at the front of The Guardian just to make the point that, according to The Guardian, May is feeling the heat. I don't know if we've got the e-petition, which I think we probably showed a while ago, but that reinforces this idea that you've got this kind of sort of Damocles hanging over the May administration. In terms of handling the state visit, we don't know when it's going to be. We presume it's going to be at some point later this year. It's going to be a tricky one, to put it mildly.
If you're being charitable to Theresa May, you would say she's in a very difficult position. She has to maintain this. The amount that she talks about the special relationship makes me a little bit embarrassed, because I always get the sense it's something that we feel very keenly, but perhaps the Americans don't really care about.
What's wrong with cozying up to the global superpower?
What's wrong is that we are a great country in our own right, and we have values that are recognised the world round. We have a reputation for fairness and decency, for our institutions working, for our judges being incorruptible. We've got a lot to be proud of, apart from the fact that we're America's buddy. We can't be standing next to them and agreeing with everything they do, particularly when you've got someone as volatile and worrying as Donald Trump at the helm.
And the difficulty of a state visit isn't just Theresa May and the government, it's about the royal family and the Queen.
But that's what they do, though, isn't it? They frequently welcome, as head of state, the Queen welcomes pretty unwelcome visitors. The Ceausescus raided their cutlery, etc. They're used to dealing with some pretty awkward people.
And actually, this petition, if you read the wording of the petition, it's not to ban Donald Trump from coming to the UK. It says we mustn't have a state visit because it would embarrass the Queen, because Donald Trump has said some rather uncouth things about women and etc. It's not specifically related to all of this. It will be quite funny to see him standing next to the Queen, given what he's said he's happy to do to women. But nonetheless, yes, this is part of her role. She has to accept everybody who is a major player on the global stage.
Let's pull up to the Times, page 6 and 7. Charles said, staying with the royals.
Yes.
A different angle on this one, though.
Yes, well, I mean, people say lots of different things about Prince Charles and his political ambitions, and some people have felt very strongly because Prince Charles writes letters to MPs, and some Republicans say this is very bad and he shouldn't be involved in politics. But, you know, another view is it's quite a good thing that he's very engaged with things like climate change. It's, you know, he could be just going off and shooting lions in Africa or what other princes do. But apparently, when Trump comes to the UK, Charles is going to give him a lecture on climate change, which Trump probably isn't going to want to listen to. So maybe it will be a mutual thing that they don't spend.
Well, maybe Prince Charles can give him a copy of his Ladybird book that he's just written about climate change. That's got pictures, and I'm going to guess that's the kind of book that might just work with Trump. Because I think he's probably not a great reader. Would be my guess. But if there are pictures, you never know. But Trump famously has said that climate change is an invention of the Chinese to help mask Chinese investment and growth. And you know, I think it's going to these awkward diplomatic incidents are ones that anybody involved in the Foreign Office would be desperate to avoid, because it can only do damage. There's no benefit at all, and they're sort of slightly caught on the horns now, because if Trump has to come, he needs to be treated as the head of state, as he is. And if, as people suggest, there might be 1 or 2 or maybe even more million people protesting on the streets, that does damage to us in Britain.
We've seen this before, though, in a sense. You know, the palace have to nod and be polite, and Prince Charles becomes this sort of outrider. We saw it with the Chinese, where I think he avoided one dinner, and this was taken as being terribly symbolic. Of course, as and when he becomes our next head of state, he's got to stop doing this, hasn't he?
Yes, he does, but he doesn't have to now, and I say, you know, credit to him. We have to show the world that there is more to us than that image that was all over the front pages on Saturday morning of Theresa May holding hands with Donald Trump. It's good to show the diversity of opinion in this country, and if it's reflected in the royal family, so much the better.
And to be fair, we need more friends in this country. You know, we can't just hook our wagon to the United States. We should be out there trying to make connections with leaders all over the world. And you're right, it's sometimes a difficult balance to get. You know, Theresa May dealing with human rights in Turkey yesterday, and with a defence deal that the British were very keen to get signed. You know, these are difficult things to do, and that's what our politicians have to do. But we can't just look across the Atlantic and think that it's about Trump, because 70% of the world's population live east of Venice, and that's a part of the world we need to engage with, understand better, teach about in schools, and so on and so forth. And if all you do is you're seen by the outside world as being in the pocket of Donald Trump, with a state visit here and us going over there, then where is the effort that we're putting in other parts of the world? And that's incredibly important in this age of Brexit.
Do you think, Jenny, that perhaps Theresa May was too keen, that we, the British, were too keen to organise that visit to see Trump? I mean, Angela Merkel, there's a feeling that perhaps Merkel's standing back, other European leaders just standing back, waiting to see how things pan out.
Absolutely, we were too keen. I think Theresa May wanted also to show that it's not just Nigel Farage who can have an audience with Trump. You know, obviously Nigel Farage saw him 3 times since he won the election. There was a lot to prove, and you know, this idea that we would be at the front of the queue for trade negotiations, even though Trump never actually said that. This is what I think has come after Brexit, is a slightly desperate air of, oh, look, we're doing well, look, people want to talk to us. We have to make things work in a way that we didn't have to make things work a year ago.
Can we not give any credibility to this idea that you can, if you're going to have critical engagement, then you need to be close to somebody to offer them frank advice?
That's what she said, but she's not done it. She said, you know, we can be friends who disagree. I won't be afraid of telling him when I don't agree with him. But then she's done nothing other than tell Johnson and Rudd, oh, please have a word with your opposite numbers and say that we're not too happy at the way you're treating British nationals.
I think it's hard to get it right. And, you know, I think that the problem was yesterday, where it was clear that the government here were caught in the headlights, and they didn't know whether it was the right thing, having just got back from Washington, to criticise Trump, and you know, the line that, well, we have our policy and they have theirs, and we don't have to agree on everything. That passing of the buck, obviously that stiffened overnight, and an idea that we had to engage. And this looks like, you know, it's being presented as a great triumph by Boris Johnson in particular to have somehow delivered a concession. But you know, the fact of the matter is the decision made in the States and this order has been catastrophically damaging for the United States.
Well, let's just hope that's it for Trump for this evening, because coming up, find out the best way to tame Twitter trolls. It's not a Trump story, honestly. Welcome back. We're taking a look at tomorrow's newspapers, and we're doing that in the company tonight of the documentary maker and journalist Jenny Kleeman and the historian Peter Frankopan. Jenny, if only you could tell us again about that story about getting lost in the jungle, but that's for another time, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
So we go instead to the Times, page 1, and mobiles from age 6.
Apparently, more than 20,000 children aged 6 have a mobile phone, and 100,000 8-year-olds have one. And I'm really interested in this story. I'm making a documentary at the moment. I'm making a film about sleep and how children sleep. And one of the things that's making children sleep a lot worse than they did in previous generations is the fact that they are addicted to technology, iPads and phones, and not just the blue light. You may have heard the blue light from the stimulates you, stops you from manufacturing the hormone that makes you sleepy, but also the stimulation. And if you're on a phone and you're getting alerts all the time, you can't put it down, you can't go to sleep. And so it's quite worrying if this many children. It was something I thought that maybe when you start secondary school you might get a phone. Maybe I'm being really naive, but surely you don't need to give your 6-year-old a phone, because it's not like they'll ever be anywhere without you or without someone looking after them. So they don't need one.
They can text you from the other side of the dinner table,
Yes.
saying that they like a bit more water. I mean, it's true with kids. With our children, we spend a lot of the time telling them to get off their phones, and the fact is, this is also how young kids do communicate with each other, and in fact it forms much wider friendships, many more friends, but much shallower, and that will have long-term implications. But that is the world around us, and it's quite hard to stand in the way of
and repudiate it
of change. And people were worried about the printed book when it came out as well, and thought that was going to change how people communicated too. I think in a way this is part of the bigger story, which is when you think how many times you go out for dinner, how many people are sitting texting each other at the table, and these kids are learning it from their parents. It's not their fault that they get given a phone, and that's how they communicate. And there are some benefits. I mean, let's hope they don't turn up to tweet like Donald Trump does.
Banned. We've moved on from Trump. Come on.
Well, I think with these kids, it's quite hard to chastise, and there's nothing worse as a parent being told what you should do for your own children. Everyone has to make their own choices, and some of these kids, will be having handsets because they're their primary care helper at home. There are lots of reasons. I suspect probably not. Most of them, I imagine, will get it so they can play games in silence and leave their parents alone. But maybe that has benefits too. That
we tried the curfew thing. Have you tried the curfew?
Yes.
Where didn't
well, that's
work.
what you're meant to do. You're not meant to let your child use a phone, or nobody's meant to use one for an hour before they go to bed, but particularly with children, that's what you're meant to do.
We've got friends who change their Wi-Fi password and only put it back when the room's clean, house
we've done that.
and the table laid or cleared. Works wonders.
Apparently. Yeah, actually, the children did clean the house yesterday. If you are watching, you shouldn't be watching, clearly, but thank you. We're going to move on to the FT, and this is actually the Trojan horse story on the front of the FT, which I'm going to pull up for you now, and possible Russian involvement. Surely not.
Well, yes, this is what the Russians have, of course, been accused of in the past. Germany's expecting that there will be some kind of interference. It doesn't say what, but we assume it would be cyber interference?
Yes.
I don't know, hacking, something like that.
I think not only fake news and planting positive and negative stories about favoured candidates, but again, this is not really new. I mean, when there were successions in royal houses all over Europe hundreds of years ago, betting on the right horse is very important. And actually, what I personally believe is that the Russians want to back as many horses as possible. Although
maximum disruption.
Maximum disruption, that's right. And I think in the case of Germany, it's a slightly different kettle of fish because of Merkel. But, arguably, if you're sitting in Moscow wondering about the German election, I think you probably have misgivings about what happens with Trump, because you can't guess his next move. And the problem about helping disruption win is that you're left in limbo land too. So, it's not unusual to see something like this. What can be done to stop it and so on? It's a tricky world with this cybersecurity, but most countries have very sophisticated cybersecurity programs, and they're not only defending themselves. Listening into what other people are doing, gathering information, and trying to pick the right candidate is a fact of life that we might not want to recognise.
There we are. We're focusing on the French elections tonight. I mean, we will, in time, I'm sure, focus on the German elections. When you consider how much time the media generally spend, say, on the American election compared to the German election. I know as a former Europe correspondent, I used to lament the fact that we didn't care very much about what was happening in some of these countries. If I say to you, should we care more, I'm sure you'll say yes.
Well, of course we should, because, there are close neighbours. Equally, we need to see how far this tide is turning of right-wing populism. Is it taking over all of Europe as much as it is taken over, in many respects, our country as well as the US? I think the idea of cyber interference, though, I was just sort of thinking now about how so many things are now purely done in the digital world. Not purely done, but you imagine so much spying now so much time of spies would be devoted to looking at digital things, and equally, you will get you don't really get bank robberies anymore, but you get, you know, cybercrime and cyber theft.
Well, old-fashioned sort of kinetic crime.
Yes, you know, the Hatton Garden thing was a sort of last hurrah, not just of those old guys, but perhaps of the entire discipline.
We shouldn't lionise it. We're not lionising it.
We're not lionising it, but we're not celebrating it. But, you know, this is how things are done now, and if you're going to be a spy, you're going to spend a lot of time online, I think.
Well, the digital world has made us all much more fragile and much more vulnerable, and it's not just through influencing elections, it's to do with, you know, what kind of information is being gathered about us by social media, but also in terms of, as you say, from bank security and cyber security through to every aspect of our daily lives, power grids and so on.
You sound like a digital optimist. Would you agree with Sebastian Faulks, who I interviewed over there 5 or 6 years ago, who said this is the first generation in human history to be more stupid than the previous one? Because of the digital thing.
Well, Sebastian is never wrong about anything, and so I'm not certainly not going to go on TV and disavow because he's
not
a friend
for the first time this evening, Peter. That was an elegant wriggle off the hook. So to the Times, how to tame Twitter trolls.
This is such a brilliant story. You found this story. This is such a brilliant story. It's basically about people like J.K. Rowling and James Blunt who have turned replying to Twitter trolls into an art. And in fact, James Blunt has a lot of followers, arguably not because they love his music, but because he's so funny. People send him insults all the time, and he just bats them back. One of the things, he's got 1.3 million followers. My favourite of this is, he tweeted recently, "If you thought 2016 was bad, I'm releasing an album in 2017." So not taking himself seriously. This, you know, he knows that people take the mick
and
out
the
of him.
the tweet underneath that says, "Who on earth invited James Blunt to the Invictus Games?" He replied on Twitter, "Prince Harry, full stop, by text, full stop, boom." You know, so hats off for not taking himself too seriously. But, you know, this is saying something serious about Twitter trolls. People feel that they can say things online without any consequences and repercussions, and that you're hidden by the fact that either you disguise your identity or people can't see you. And, you know,
and if you take them on, you bear the risk.
Well, yes, and there's this idea that you don't feed the trolls. You know, for all of the messages I get, you don't respond to them, because that's why people send you these ridiculous things, is because it makes them so thrilled to think that they might have got your attention. And I quite like this style of dealing with it. I mean, it's a sophisticated shutdown, and I like it.
Guys, we've got to leave it there. We're going to get the weather in, but Jenny, Peter, thanks both very much for your picks tonight. Really enjoyed them. Thanks a lot. Let's see what the weather's got in store then.